Hey everyone, Mr. Wineland here. We are going over section two of chapter nine. So we're going to get into a little bit of women in public life. This is going to go into some of the pre-progressive movement stuff, um, and also right up to the beginning of the progressive movement for women. We aren't going to get quite into the final um, decision of the right to vote, but we're building up to the women's suffrage movement. And we're seeing that a lot of individuals like Suzetta Lafeschi in 1879, she's a young woman, a traveler. She can translate into English. She does this for a lot of Native American tribes. She could do this for Native Americans. She does this for Chief Standing Bear, who's a Ponca people and had been forcibly removed from the homeland of Nebraska. And your definition of her is in blue. Um, and we see that she was invited by Standing Bear to go into and lecture on a lecture tour to draw attention to Ponca's situation, and so she translated for them and then opportunity to help them move forward. And she also helped testify before congressional committees and helped the passage of the Dawes Act in 1887, which then would allow Native Americans to claim reservation land and citizenship rights. So she was able to help Native Americans through her talents of translation. But you're seeing some of this role of activism happening in this time frame in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, where women are getting involved and they're trying to make a difference, primarily not just for themselves, but for certain causes. They really tend to just latch on to certain things. Before the Civil War, we see that married middle class women were not expected. Um, um, I'm sorry, they were expected. My bad. They were expected to devote most of their time to homes and families. They were not expected to go and try and create a life of their own. Uh, but by the late 19th century, we're seeing a lot more we're starting to see a lot of middle class and upper class women really start to afford the opportunity or get the opportunity to go and try to learn how to get an education and then use that education in the workforce. A lot more poorer women had no choice. If they did get a job, they had to work for low wages, and a lot of times they also had to work at home as well when they weren't working. On southern Midwestern farms, you see a lot of women had some roles the same as the previous century. You know, mostly working, cooking, cleaning, dealing with the laundry, having to deal with the livestock. Women had to help with the plowing, the planting, anything that was needed for the family. But we start to see more better opportunities come up. As we start to progress towards the 1900s, as cities are growing with new options for jobs, and we're seeing labor unions are growing for men, but they're not growing for women, and they're really excluding women. But that doesn't mean that women aren't fighting for their rights. They're not going and trying to just be like, it's okay, we're good. We're good just being women and getting low wages. No, like they're starting to learn how to speak for themselves, advocate for themselves. And we see after 1900, 1 in 5 women hold jobs, 25%. So your answer number five is 25%. In manufacturing, the garment trade claimed about half of the women. We start to see textile factories. We see a lot of clothing factories are the type of factories that really are pushing for these type of women that really want their skills to be a part of it. Now, part of it is stereotype. I mean, a lot of women have some experience as part of this time with clothing and how to tend to clothing, how to make it, how to sew and all that stuff. So we start to see that happening. Um, the least skilled positions, however, received only half as much money as to their male counterparts. So women, even though they're doing the same job, are not getting paid the same. Also began, we still see women filling jobs in offices, stores, classrooms. These jobs were required for high school education. By 1890, women in high school were outnumbering men. We are seeing women in high school because they're not intended to get a job right away and support a family that way. They're the ones who are spending more time with their high school education and they're finishing it and then they're going off to college. Moreover, new business schools are preparing bookkeepers and stenographers. So females are starting to be um, needed for these types of things. Your answer number 6 is 2 million here. We also see female education is important, or industrial skills contributed to the economic survival of their families by doing domestic work such as cleaning and for other families. 2 million African American women were freed from slavery, and poverty quickly drove them, nearly half of them, into the workforce. We see that many had worked on farms, worked as domestic workers, migrated to the thousands of big cities to get jobs as cooks, laundry dresses, scrub women, maids. And we see about in 1870, 70% of employed women were in service jobs. We see a lot of unmarried immigrant women did domestic labor as well. First to arrive in the United States, excuse me, yawning there. Basically contributed to the family income with their piecework and caring for borders at home. We see that women are leading reform. We see that they're working in dangerous conditions. We saw a little bit about that um, with some of the problems that were happening with industry, as people are losing limbs, people are losing lives due to fires and tragedies. We're seeing low wages, long hours, many female industry workers pushing for reforms. The ranks grew after 146 workers, mostly Jewish and Italian immigrants, died in the 1911 fire in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, which we talked a little bit about this. We talked about that factory and how certain factors played into the role of their deaths, primarily no access to water to put out fires, no access to numerous exits, being one of them, and then also to ladders and couldn't be reached. There was no escape routes to go outside the window. So it just, a lot of these things are building up. So we start to see more middle and upper class women entering the public sphere, really fighting for these things. By 1910, we see women's clubs at which these women discuss such events and such things. Were nearly half of a million strong. These clubs sometimes grew into reform groups that address such things like child labor. We see women in higher education. Women are really addressing education in colleges. In the late 19th century, Vassar College, with faculty of 8 men and 22 women, accepted its first students in 1865. Smith and Wesley colleges followed in 1875. Though Columbia, Brown, Harvard colleges refused to admit women, each university established a separate college for the women. A lot of women were able to enter the workforce or sought a higher education. Almost half of college-educated women were in the late, excuse me, 19th century, never married, retaining their own independence. Many of these educated women began to apply their skills to needed social reforms. We see uneducated laborers started efforts to reform workplace health and safety. We see women often were strengthening existing reform groups and providing leadership in these aspects. By 1896, we see African women founded the National Association of Colored Women, NACW, which was led by Josephine Ruffin, who identified the mission of education, managed nurseries, reading rooms, and kindergartens. Basically, they were wanted to ensure that the 14th and 15th Amendment were being protected, including their right to vote, African American men, but excluding women. And we start to see that during this time, women are really fighting for that right to vote. Susan B. Anthony being one of them, one of the biggest proponents of women's suffrage, and which is the right to vote. The thing, though, about Susan B. Anthony, and I want to be very careful about how I talk about this, but Susan B. Anthony is famous for the right to vote. However, Susan B. Anthony was very exclusive on who should vote. Um, Early on, she was in support of the 13th Amendment and that freeing slaves, and so she did kind of have a very futuristic ideals, liberal or radical ideas. However, even though she believed in freedom for African Americans and it was against slavery, she did not believe that African American men were equal to white women. And that's where the white privilege aspect comes into play here. And Susan B. Anthony is quoted, would sooner cut off my right hand than ask the ballot for the black man and not for women. However, what she leaves off in that quote is not all women. It is implied to white women. And that is the problem. Susan B. Anthony basically, when the 15th Amendment comes out and is passed, and they give the vote to black men over white women, basically that frustrates Susan B. Anthony. Now, to be fair, both Republicans and Democrats at that time were had a hard time with equality for women. They did not want women to have equal rights to men. So, and to be also another fair, the Democrats were pushing hard against the 15th Amendment. However, again, Reconstruction was able to push that forward. And had it not been for Reconstruction, who knows when that amendment would have been passed. So it was a fight to even get that. But Susan B. Anthony, to be clear, did not support all women. She supported white women to get the vote. And we're going to learn a little bit later why the Republicans and Democrats of that time in 1919 allowed women, white women, or women to have the right to vote, because they knew that white women being on their side could push their discriminative laws and laws that could basically suppress the rights of African Americans. So, want to be fair. We do see in 1869, Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton founded the National Women's Suffrage Association. Stanton also having some of the similar views as Anthony. So it's the NWSA, excuse me, which united with another group in 1890 to become the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NAWSA. Women's suffrage faced opposition, mostly from liquor industry, because then your answer number 7 is not just industry, but it's industries, because it was things like liquor who were worried that if women got the right to vote, that they would vote in prohibition, which then would hurt their business. Then there was the textile industry that worried that women would vote restrictions on child labor, which would hurt their business. So industries feared the right to vote. So many men also feared women having a role in society and making changes and things like equality. So we see suffragist leaders try 3 different approaches to achieve this objective. First, they tried to convince state legislators to grant women the right to vote, and they were successful in some. They had a victory in Wyoming in 1869. By 1890, they got Utah, Colorado, and Idaho to grant the votes to women. However, by 1896, other states were failing, and it wasn't going to be until in the 1900s that we start to see more states accept the right to vote, and then eventually the 19th Amendment, the Constitutional Amendment, allowing it. Second approach was pursued court cases to test the 14th Amendment, declare that states denying their male citizens the right to vote would lose congressional representation. In 1871, 1872, Susan B. Anthony and other women tested the question by attempting to vote at least 150 times in 10 states and the District of Columbia. The Supreme Court ruled in 1875 that women were indeed citizens, but then denied that citizenship automatically conferred the right to vote. So technically they were citizens, but you have certain rights to that of men. So that's kind of the problem that was happening here. We ultimately see that, let's see. All right. We ultimately see that that third was push for national constitutional amendment to grant women the right to vote. Stanton succeeded in having an amendment introduced in California, but it was killed later. Next 41 years, women would lobby it, reintroduce it, and finally, but it continually would get voted down. Before the turn of the century, the campaign for suffrage achieved only a modest success, but we will eventually see it pay off in 1919. So women's reform efforts paid off in the improvements of the treatment of workers and safer food and drug products, which their women are going to get an ally in some of these things with Theodore Roosevelt, with the progressive movement, which we're going to talk about, who helped to reform business, labor, and the environment. And we'll talk about that in section 3. See you then.